So welcome to the Cornerstone Catch Up. This week we have a very special guest in terms of Dom Bradley. Dom is the Group CEO of Spring Housing Association, which is a housing charity that works across the West Midlands. It's been a really good interview. Some of the things we've spoken about that have been a particular interest is the Fred Winters Centre in Stratford, which is a groundbreaking development, a partnership development of multiple agencies working to provide frontline support for homeless people. And we've also learned a lot about the journey of Spring from effectively a charitable startup through to what they are today with a larger organisation with multiple support contracts and over 100 employees. So it's been a really interesting story in terms of Dom's personal journey and the growth of Spring.
So I suppose, Dom, you got nominated for this. How does that feel? Like the Ice Bucket Challenge?
Yeah, Carly owes me a beer, doesn't she, basically? So yeah.
She does. As soon as you can have a proper beer, she definitely owes you one. Yeah, absolutely. We'll try not to make it too awkward. I think you've probably seen the questions, haven't you? So we've got our own little special list.
I've really tried not to concentrate on them too much, though. I did have a read last week, but just what Joe said, we've always had pretty natural conversations, so I'm just trying to focus on that and then see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the purpose of why we're trying to do this was really we'd had catch-ups before and they were very much around like what Cornerstone was doing and giving people an update, people that are interested in what we're doing. And one of the things that we always found was whenever we involved guests who had an interesting story, we got so much more engagement. The feedback was a lot higher. So we thought, well, what better way to really share what's going on and give people what they want to see and hopefully create a little bit of a platform for people who have got really interesting stories or passionate about what they do to share. And we wanted to try and focus that on housing, homelessness support. And the idea was we created a little shortlist. I mean, you were on the shortlist anyway. So when Carly nominated you, I was like, brilliant.
The only way is down from here on in, Gav. That's the worry, isn't it, really? So,
yeah, it's a really short shortlist. It was just you and Carly. So I mean, so it was just a natural fit, really, with your expertise and knowledge, particularly within the West Midlands. To have
You're already winning me over, Gav. You're making it sound ever so good. I'm glad you don't talk to my colleagues as part of this process because you get a completely different story. I'm glad this is not a 360. So yeah,
he's got a song that he wrote for you that he'll sing at the end of. It's
yeah, it's lovely. You don't want to hear me singing, that's for sure. So I mean, I'm just trying to think, Dom, when we first met. I think it would have been with Dean, wouldn't it? That you first met.
I think Dean? It was Dean. Yeah. You know what it was? You know how it came about? Rachel, my colleague, who leads on like a lot of our business development and grants, and she'd met Dean. I'm sure we spoke about this before, but she met Dean at the Homeless Forum up at the Salvation Army, and she kind of came back and said, oh, there's some really interesting guys. They really remind me of when we started out. They've got a lot of energy. I think she's implying by that we're quite deflated now, and you guys have got, we've passed the ball on and we've been worn out by everything. But she said, oh, they're really good guys, really interesting what they're talking about. Try and catch up with them when you can. And I think there was quite a big gap from that conversation to us actually managing to achieve that. But I think that was the original link. I think you were there, Dean, weren't you?
Yeah. Met Rachel at the Homelessness Forum. I think it was the first time we'd kind of gone over to any networking in Birmingham, within the homelessness community, I suppose. And Rachel was in front of me. I think we just got talking, and that's kind of how we got started. At that time, we were working with the Salvation Army. Yeah. So we wanted to pick up a conversation around trying to align ourselves with the right partners, and obviously, I'd heard of Spring, but went home and looked into it a little bit and thought, yeah, this is great. So I remember the first time we met, I think I may have come over with Carol, actually. We came over to your office. We were just at the process of scoping out the Fred Winters Centre. Yeah. Kind of getting put together, and that was all really exciting. So, yeah, it was good. I think I had the same perspective as you did in terms of just an organisation that's, those good few years ahead of where we are, but kind of started out on a similar trajectory, I guess, in terms of its ambitions and its hopes for accommodation and property and things like that. So you've always been an organisation we've had an eye on, really.
So what I suppose the first most important question, Dom, is how are you?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm absolutely fine. So enjoying a few less restrictions, to be honest with you. So it's been great. My son started playing cricket again, which is where I got my lovely sunburn from. And so I've been getting involved with that, and I'm involved in managing his team. So it's one of those things where you start off having a beer on a Friday, going to watch them train, and then 2 years later you're throwing hard balls at young guys and getting involved in managing and coaching. That wasn't my intention when we went down there all those years ago, but yeah, it's been really good to do some, I guess, normal activities. And yeah, we managed to get away for a few days a couple of weeks ago, managed to see my gran in a care home through the glass and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it feels like some big milestones, for us to get a sense of normality back anyway. Personally, work remains super busy, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you local, Dom? I've never asked you. Are you from Birmingham? Are you West Midlands?
Oh, I hide my accent that well, Dean. Oh, that's fantastic. No, I am from Birmingham, from North Birmingham. So would have grown up in like Bannersgate, New Oscar, which is close to Sutton Coldfield, or part of New Oscar is part of Sutton Coldfield. Yep. So yeah, always been from the posh part of the city, basically.
I was going to say that's the posh part. I mean, I'm from Tamworth, and I sound more of a Brummie than you, Dom. And how have you found the pandemic? How have you coped through it, Dom?
I think we've all had different strategies, and there's a number of people have been really affected by it that are close to me as well. So it's been a particular challenge, and work's thrown up some really interesting things. But I guess actually work has kept me going through a lot of it, and also having really good support networks with friends, family, those type of things. So I'm one of the lucky ones from that perspective. So yeah, it's been really, really weird. And there's some things that you're probably not supposed to admit, but there's some things that I have really enjoyed, that stepping back, getting a few of my evenings back, and doing some of those things that I hadn't done in ages, like reconnecting with people and just finding space and time and doing a bit of, reconnecting with nature a little bit. A lot of people have said that, haven't they? But, taking time out and loads of things I've discovered about our local area, because all we've been able to do is walk around. So, those type of things have been, I have enjoyed, as much as there's been so much misery around during this period. I've just tried to be as positive and as robust as possible, I guess, in what has been a really challenging situation. But, very lucky, in a lot of the circumstances that I find myself in. We've got a garden, we've got loads of things to engage, and so yeah, it's been the strangest of times, but we've tried to make the absolute most of it. Which, from looking at your stuff, you've done exactly the same, really.
Yeah. I think me and Dean have had the same experience, I suppose, haven't we? In terms of being incredibly busy. So when there's people that need support, it gives you a focus, and it allows you to, I suppose, take your mind off everything else that's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's really opened up a number of questions, about how we work and what we do, and a lot of people get into this this home working versus the work environment. And it's been really interesting to see the contrast with our own staff about people's approaches to that. But one of the things we really had to think about was, how do we maintain the culture of our organisation? It's very different when you're working from home and you're going to see people. And a lot of our services are very much face-to-face, so we couldn't curtail that. We obviously had to shut certain services or completely change the way we did them, but we kept them going throughout. And it was really interesting, those discussions, because part of the process over the last 12 years, we've taken on loads of staff. So in the old days, a big part of it would have been, 3-4 weeks of shadowing in lots of different offices, spending time with lots of colleagues, really ingraining yourself, hopefully, in what Spring does and what Spring's about. And we've had to look at that in a very, very different way. But it's been really interesting. I think quite a lot of the feedback we've had around the office closures and things like that is actually that social time that staff have together about, it's not all work. There are those little conversations that engage people in what they're doing, but, those bonds, those friendships that occur through the workplace as well, that's been lost because it is a bit more formal when you're online, or you tend to be very focused because you don't want to keep people online all of the time because people are quite fatigued by all of that. So it's been a really interesting challenge about particularly how we've engaged our existing staff, but B, the amount of new colleagues. I think it's 25 to 30 new colleagues we've had during the pandemic in various projects or recruitment or those type of things, which has been a really interesting challenge that I thought we'd never have to think about around our culture and how we do things. So yeah, that's been one of the biggest internal challenges through this process, as well as obviously maintaining our services through this period.
I've seen a couple of studies recently. I forwarded one over to Dean, and it was around the impact of back-to-back sort of Zoom meetings or virtual meetings, and like the stress level in the brain. They've done like an EEG on somebody whilst they're on them, and basically it's like a cumulative stress level from being in back-to-back Zoom meetings. And then off the flip side of that, I saw another study which was about proximity and the effectiveness of teams versus the proximity of them sitting together. And it's like a direct relationship between the closer people sit together, the more effective they are in terms as a team. So you put those two things together, and it sort of naturally says, come and work together closely. So I understand that there's benefits to both. I mean, I've always been an office person. I like to be around people. But there's been certain benefits of working from home at different stages, because you can be focused, like you say, and get work done.
Yeah, it really resonates what you say about being close to your colleagues. Because I remember when we started at Spring, and we basically cuckooed in other organisations' offices. So we were kind of like in an open plan office. So whether you wanted to know or you didn't want to know, everybody kind of knew what was going on in every single element of the business. And that was so good in terms of fostering that support for each other and knowing what we were all doing and understanding why we were doing certain things, because you saw why we were doing that, because we were working hand in glove though. Yeah. We've had to manage that transition, because particularly with some of our longer serving staff, because I've seen kind of, I guess, a very family-based organisation, or that feel, from how we were when we started out to kind of where we are now, which is very, very different. We've got over 100 staff, which sounds even crazy to say that. But over 100 staff. So that transition has been more challenging, actually, particularly for our longer serving colleagues who say, I think the thing they always say, if something doesn't feel right, that doesn't feel like Spring, so we always have to think about those kind of challenges. It's interesting around the training and some of the things that we're doing at the moment around trauma-informed approaches and how we're engaging with staff. It's really interesting to hear people's responses to all of that. So yeah, really resonates with me what you're saying there.
Well, I think that's a good opportunity, Dom, for you to sort of fill us in on what your role is, what Spring's about. Just give us the sort of history of you and Spring. I think that'd be a really good place to get some more information. Sure.
Well, just a little bit about Spring. I guess Spring, we started out 7 years ago, so we're a housing charity. So I think 95% of all of our services are housing led, whichever it is. We've got kind of some core themes that we do. So we work with people at risk of homelessness, and that's a pretty broad church in terms of the client group that we work with under that banner, but specifically focusing on younger people, larger families, refugees, and single homeless in that portfolio. And I guess our genesis was a number of different factors that how we were born. There was 3 or 4 of us that had worked together over a number of years in various settings, and we always kind of wanted to go back, I guess, to the original ethos of the social housing movement, and really house those that were in the most housing need. We've seen massive changes, haven't we, in every area you can think of in our line of work. And one of the big things, I think, in housing associations is that they were going into big group structures, particularly at the time we started. A lot of pressure from government to do that, so they can borrow more and build more homes. That's the genesis of that. But I think there was a strong feeling amongst a group of us that, as a result of some of those things that we'd witnessed and seen, or been a part of, or been a conduit to, we'd seen that they'd lost some of that, either the community work, the community anchor stuff, or really working with those that are most in housing need, or actually migrating. Are they still doing what they were set out to do all those years ago? And I think that's a really interesting challenge that I hope boards ask themselves with in those housing associations, those mega group structures that are happening. So we wanted to do something a little bit different, but a bit old school, I guess, and that's how we started. I think from a personal perspective, I probably wouldn't have had the bravery to do it if it wasn't for personal circumstances. So My partner at the time had a very serious illness, so she passed away as well. But it gave me, I think, the courage through that process. I probably never would have had the courage otherwise, actually, to do something, I think, a lot. It felt like jumping off a cliff at the time, as I'm sure you guys felt when you set up Cornerstone from what you were doing before. But it gave me certainly the courage and the bravery to do what felt something quite radical for me at that specific time, because I'm quite a loyalist. I enjoy the organisations I work with. I ingrain myself into those type of things. So it felt, but I was ready to do it, and I probably should have done it a couple of years sooner. In hindsight, when you really reflect back now with all the stuff you know now. But I just wasn't ready personally, I think, at that stage, or brave enough. But there was a couple of things we really wanted to do when we set up Spring that, in the main, I think we've achieved. I think one of the things is, and which really concurs with what you guys do, we wanted to use private sector property and use it for a social purpose. There's a complete gap in the market around that type of thing. And it's kind of, or there's this kind of stuff around what's happening around exempt accommodation. So it gets confused with what it can be do in terms of an enabler. So we wanted to do some of that. And so I spent a lot of time going to auctions and throwing my card around and trying to meet landlords and investors and all of that type of stuff, particularly in the early days.
Your business card or your credit card, Dom?
No, the business card. The business card. Yeah. There was a few hairy moments. I think my last paycheck at my last organisation was paid for the first lease that we took on at Spring. Yeah. So there was 3 or 4 months where I had no money. So thanks, Mum. And I was 35 then, relying on my mum or whatever it was, or 34, to pay my own bills to get Spring going. So I think it was 5 or 6 months I didn't take a salary. So again, it was an interesting period. I'll talk about that in a little bit, actually. The other thing we wanted to do was not be reliant on grants or local authority contracts. We'd seen through, I guess, the austerity programme, all of these safety net services disappearing, the Supporting People programme, all of that type of stuff. And that had it stripped everything bare, and we'd seen people really struggle. People forget now, but when you walked around in Birmingham city centre in 2010, you didn't step over people living on the streets every 10 metres. That wasn't a thing. There wasn't, hundreds of food banks across the West Midlands. There wasn't. People don't remember now that was the case, and it wasn't that long ago. So we didn't want to rely on stuff that, if they went, which loads of stuff had just gone at that time in 2014, we still wanted to exist. So it meant for us, we needed to be really tight on housing management. We needed to cross-subsidise certain things that we did. And that was really critical to achieve our social purpose at that time. And I think the last thing that we said, and it's always been an unwritten rule, but our trustees are mad on it now, which is really good and challenging for us, was to keep our central costs below 10%. So we really were reinvesting in our two best assets, which are our property, and more importantly, our people. And we can evidence that literally. So, when people go through our accounts, they can see where our money's going. They can see that's what we're literally spending in terms of what, and hopefully, when we go through those audits, or when people take a close look at us, they can sense that is exactly what we're doing. We've always managed to live through that mantra. Although our profiles change, so if I look at our turnover now, I think just over 25% of our income comes from local authority contracts and grants. But what we try and imagine is, what if they weren't there, could we still run those services? In the vast majority of cases, I think we could. I don't think we'd be happy with it because it'd be skeleton staff and all the rest of it, but we could. There's some specific programs like the resettlement programs and things that absolutely couldn't do without the support that we get. But a lot of what we do, particularly around homelessness, could survive, and I think that's an absolute key test for us to maintain and weather storms, which we've had to do. We're in the latest one and the biggest one yet, obviously, with COVID.
What sorry, I don't know if you get comfortable answering this, but if you're saying 25% of the revenue for the organisation is from local authority contracts, the rest, just thinking about who might be listening to this and those that might or might not be comfortable with how an organisation like yours is run and funded, where's the rest come from?
Majority is rents and service charges, so that housing management point. Yep. So about 30% of our accommodation is affordable. Yep. So by affordable, I mean affordable in social housing terms. So And we don't do much at social rent. Our dream is to do tons of social rent. That is what's in our business plan. And one of the things we've struggled to survive. And the reason why, we can't get leases to work like that. So that has to be stuff that we buy and build our own. And we're starting to do that, but it's on a micro scale, because it needs a lot of money to do that, and a lot of subsidy from our own organisation. So that's what we will do. But yeah, the vast majority of the rest is rent and service charges. And our profiles change. That 26% is obviously the biggest it's ever been for this financial year. So just through various contracts that we've got around vulnerable adults and some of the work that we've been doing in Stratford and the resettlement specifically.
Yeah. It's interesting that a couple of questions on that bit there. Then I suppose in terms of the non-reliance on local authority contracts, but obviously, like from our perspective, we're very reliant on local authority contracts, and almost as a if we're kind of a little junior Spring, I suppose, in terms of a new organisation trying to do that private and social connection, you go for that local authority contract because that looks like security. That feels like security.
Yeah.
In terms of growth, so it's interesting that different perspective.
It's really useful. Absolutely, it's really useful to us now. But we've always looked at what happened in 2010 and that, or the financial crash 2008 onwards, and what happened to homeless people or people that were struggling with their housing in that period. Yeah. So, and I always argue now, we've got services that are very, very expensive because they're crisis-led, they're not prevention-led. I know Carly was talking about this in her session, and I absolutely concur with what she's saying. We've got a really expensive system now because we're dealing with the worst excesses of what happens when we don't put safety nets in place and fund things upstream. It's very unsexy, it's very unfashionable, but there's a clear evidence base that it works better than our current system. And that's one of the biggest disappointments over the last few years, that we've been involved in situations and a system that isn't working, and you're in the middle of that to some degree. And also, when we look back, there's things when I started out in my career you couldn't even imagine would be the case in 2021. When I started in 2002 doing this stuff, it's like you could not imagine there'd be 3,500 households in temporary accommodation in Birmingham alone. There would be uproar. There would have been uproar. Heads would have rolled, and some of the things that we campaign around it, exempt accommodation and those type of things. Working with really vulnerable people without a DBS, or some of the private aspects of investment and taking money out of the system, not into the system, were kind of unimaginable then. And it's just really weird to be part of that. So I always look back on my career and I think probably one of my biggest disappointments would have been that I've been involved in homelessness at this period and this juncture, because we've got the evidence base of what works. We're just not doing it right now for all sorts of political and policy reasons, ultimately.
What happened, Dom, then? Like, you were around at that point that you're describing, that transition from, like you said, 3,500 families now, but not so long ago that wasn't the case. What happened? How did we get here?
I think the fundamental aspect of it was how local authorities were funded and the whole programme of austerity, which was false economics, as we now know. So, and some of us said that at the time, but actually, we've got the most expensive homelessness service we've ever had in the history of Britain.
Yeah.
So, the stuff that we were doing before, which was working upstream, which was providing more social housing, which was delivering the Supporting People programme and ring fencing that, even though it wasn't a statutory service, saves the public purse millions and millions and millions of pounds. And actually, people say that, the NHS isn't working, that there's crisis at A&E, and, the first responders in mental health now are the police. The first responders in any type of homelessness issue, domestic abuse, all of those things is A&E. So before there was organisations in that space preventing some of those situations to happen, and it's a lot more expensive for the police to do it and for A&E to do it than for the third sector or indeed local authorities to do that. So to have the funding, I mean, if you look at Birmingham City Council, for all the what you might say the worst excesses, and there's been plenty, if you read the reviews of various things that they've been running over the last 15, 20 years. They went from something like 27,000 staff down to 7,000 in 5 years. Well, you can't do that safely, no matter how good your management is and all of those type of things. And most of that, a big part of that was what was happening in the social side of what they deliver in social care and safeguarding learning disabilities. And it's just caused kind of an avalanche of issues, which is what people now call the housing and social care crisis.
It's interesting then from a hope. So you don't point to the housing shortage so much, that not being one of the main contributing factors. You wouldn't suggest.
The housing shortage is an issue. I think it's not necessarily the housing shortage in the literal sense of the word. It's the strategic oversight of where that housing shortage is. So I find it really interesting now to talk, particularly to politicians and to councillors, because they talk about affordable housing, but affordable housing has changed. And when we talked about it 10 years ago, you'll know this from the work that you guys in the affordable housing market, there's about 5 or 6 different products within a 5-mile radius of where I'm sitting now. Like some of it's 80% market, some of it will be local housing allowance rate, some of it will be social rented. And actually, 80% of a market rate when you're living in Stratford, which is one of the areas we work, is still super expensive. For Billy that's working in Poundland on minimum wage. It's that type of thing, and getting that understanding that this is what we need to do, and where the government has not always, and local authorities have not really been an enabler of looking at more complicated sites. It's really interesting. Andy Street has been really good about this, actually, around brownfield sites and getting some enablement money for the private sector and the social sector to work together to unlock sites, because it's also important we protect our green spaces as well. But I always think it should be a policy thing now within local authorities, is that when they talk about a 30% commitment or a 20% commitment to affordable housing, they define what that affordable housing is. Is it for large families? Is it for this? And how much percentage of that is social rent? Because we need more social rent properties, because if you look at social mobility, we've lost that in this country. And one of the key enablers for social mobility was social housing, and we've made it become a dirty word over 20, 30 years. And we're now seeing some of that drivers have been, really, really difficult, despite all of the things around the right to buy. You can't knock that. What the problem was that there was no replacement strategy. So we're now seeing people can't access into housing ladders, and some social housing and housing associations have made it harder to get into social housing, under the guise of affordability assessments or those type of things. Well, that knocks out a huge swathe of most of the people we work with. They would never pass an affordability assessment for social housing. They wouldn't. They just wouldn't, because of their income levels. So it's those type of things. We are starting to see a change. It's quite interesting. I do think that there's some really interesting organisations that are really looking at their social mission, and I've been really encouraged. Like Citizen, they're doing some great work, I think, around furnished tenancies and providing carpets, curtains, white goods. So that's a massive investment, and I think that's really worthwhile, as well as some of the more traditional organisations that have always been doing a great job, like Pioneer and BVT and those other organisations that are so strong in terms of their core values and why they're here. But I think there's more that needs to come to the party, really.
I like that concept that you said, Dom, in terms of when you set up and you wanted to get away from that more sort of, I suppose, bigger institutional setup where you lose because I think that's the thing with any large organisation. One of the biggest challenges as you grow is maintaining that focus on the cultural core and the why of why you operate.
Have you been to a housing, and I feel awful now, so I feel like I'm digging out housing associations. I'm really not. That's what I'm really passionate about, actually, is supporting housing.
You kind of are one, though. Like you kind of
absolutely. But if you go into a lot of housing association offices, you could be in any corporate business. Sometimes they're on trading estates in the middle of nowhere. So, how would your, 60-year-old tenant that isn't that good on the phone and can't use the internet, relying on a call from the housing officer who's got a patch of 5,000, to get a hold of them. How do they access those services? So we always wanted to make sure that when we had, that office structure, people might come in and think it's quite corporate here. I'm sure it is from where we started, but we always wanted to make sure our accommodation was above us or around us, which is what it is, and hopefully our residents in the main could still access it. I'm sure we'd be challenged on some things, but we just want to make sure that we are that community anchor where we're based, and we're investing in that local community and not expecting something back from that, again, I'm not digging housing associations. They do some incredible community work, but they're just big. They're big beasts now, so their focus is naturally different, particularly at the top ends of those organisations, because they have to deliver. That's why they've been set up in that way, on new homes and everything.
I was just going to say, Dom, in terms of those, those early days, obviously you spoke about all being in, what was it, cuckoo, in that sort of cuckooed offices.
Cuckoo is bad language, isn't it? When you think about what some of the safeguarding issues you have to deal with cuckooing.
It is nowadays, but I get what you're saying. You have to sort of borrow space in people's offices, and obviously to go from where you are to where you are now in 7 years is big change. What were those early days like, and how have you managed that transition into a bigger organisation, yet still kept your focus on your sort of core values in terms of the support and the focus on the people that you work with?
Well, when we really started, we were working out the back of our cars. It'd be a GDPR nightmare now, by the way, how we used to do things. I think our petty cash box was a Ferrero Rocher box. We used to have to. If you'd have seen some of our properties. So I used to do things like hang the curtains and things like that, and stuff that I'm absolutely terrible about. So if you see a wonky curtain, in 2014, that was probably me putting it up at Gordon Road or wherever it was, and we used to there was 2 or 3 of us that started it, and so Raj and Subby as well. So we'd meet at the Duck, which is on the Hagley Road, which is also a hotel. So it used to be open early, so we could kind of meet and then, starting to talk about properties and those type of things and just get started. And I think we started with some friends and family. We cobbled 25 grand together. So that was our starting point. That's how we started. So we got 25 grand together. We obviously worked on a business plan for a long time before we bit the bullet in terms of started trading and everything. So we probably worked on it for about 18 months, in fairness, but it was still very much hand by mouth in those early days. Not that we ever let that on to anybody. But it was pretty hairy sometimes, how are we going to pay the staff at the end of the month, or how are we going to pay this lease? Is there something we can't pay here, so we can do this over here? And you guys definitely would have been there. And, it's that swan analogy, isn't it? You're going into meetings, And of course, back then, nobody knew who Spring was. So you would go, one of the great privileges of my job now is that most places I go to, people have at least maybe heard of us, or they might not know a lot, but they might have heard the name, particularly in the areas that we work. But back then, obviously, you guys will surely resonate with this. You're on the cell the whole time because people don't know who you are, and you have to elbow yourself into meetings and those type of things. But luckily, that makes it sound probably too dramatic, because obviously we had relationships from the careers that we'd had. So it's not like we walked into a room in Birmingham and they'd never met us before, because we'd worked in different careers previously. So hopefully that went some way to understanding where Spring came from. But yeah, it was a long and gradual journey. So our growth always looks quite dramatic when you look at it in isolation, but we probably worked on it for 18 months before, and then we've had a couple of big years the last couple of years, with that 25% of local authority contracts. It was 5% a couple of years ago. So those type of things have been an enabler in some of the places that we've been working. And through the resettlement programme, to be fair, is where we've got into certain new regions or new areas. So that's been a big part of our growth and an enabler for us. Yeah,
I mean that story of sort of meeting. We had a cafe, Dean. We need to go back there. Yeah,
was it two-tone
cafe? Yeah. we'll have to take you there, Dom. It's a magical place in Coventry called the Two-Tone Cafe.
The Two-Tone Cafe, yeah. I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, it does the best breakfast.
Does it?
Yeah, I mean that was basically where we held our meetings. So yeah, it was, and many pictures of Dean putting hammers through walls accidentally, and me and my marigolds. So yeah, we know we definitely that sort of sounds true in terms of that startup phase. But I think how did you? At what point did you start to sort of because obviously now you're a group CEO, so
it sounds so good when you say it like that, Gav, doesn't
it? over 100 staff, you're involved in sort of bigger picture policy, and that's in quite a short frame of time. You're obviously involved in the you did the exempt from responsibility piece of work, and I know you've got people. It's not everything's not you, Dom. I appreciate that, but
absolutely
obviously it's so very much instrumental in those decisions, though, and the Charter of Rights and all those sort of things. So how does that happen from putting up wonky curtain poles to being part of the Charter of Rights?
I think a couple of things. I think we've always been blessed by the people that we've managed to employ through this period, and that old adage, "You're only as good as your weakest member of staff," has definitely stood us in good stead. And we kind of benefited from other people's redundancy programs around that time. That piece I was just telling you. So, our first 5 or 6 staff were just phenomenal. We paid them probably way less than where they'd worked before, but they were out of work, and it just gave us a massive head start. And you mentioned the exempt work. We've really only made headway on the exempt thing from about 2018. I've been talking about it since 2014, but we managed to, I guess, grab Thea, who's just an absolute legend, in what she does and how she does it. And she's a practitioner, but the way she can engage with homeless people first and foremost, and providers, and build those relationships, but still have that academic side. There's not many of those humans about, and so we can talk to practitioners, we can talk to policymakers, and we have an understanding and hopefully a bit of work behind us in terms of research. So that's one of the things we've been huge advocates for. But again, we're always really keen not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So even the stuff, I think people always get the impression that we're doing down exempt accommodation. We're not. It's vital. It's absolutely essential. Every good provider of support services delivers exempt accommodation to some form or degree. Yeah, they just kind of created their own thing from where we were talking almost and not gaining any traction to all of a sudden going down to talk to our colleagues at MHCLG and the DWP and hearing that exempt from responsibilities now in the House of Commons Library. It was all kind of from where we started to how did it get like this, and leading on seminars and those type of things. That feels kind of crazy when you're talking about it in this space, from the time we started to the time we are now. But all I hope we're doing is shining a light that there's some regulations that are out of date. That's ultimately what we're talking about, that really affects vulnerable people getting a bad deal, and they deserve a better deal. And that's where all of that comes from.
On that report then, Dom, obviously it identifies some key findings. It's looking to kind of exactly what you said and kind of update the legislation, I suppose, look for an element of change there. But at the same time, the Birmingham market as well as we do in terms of the need that's there, and it's large. And so what are the kind of, to summarise maybe for people that haven't read it, a couple of the key recommendations or some of the key actions that you think are needed and would make a big difference?
If I had one bullet in the gun, and I was only allowed one, Thea might disagree with me, who's has a much deeper understanding of the issues than I do, I guess, in her research. But the one that I would say is to better define what we mean by care, support and supervision in the supported housing benefit regulations. I think this more than minimal definition really hampers housing benefit teams. It really hampers local authorities, and it doesn't give clarity to providers. Good providers, providers that are aspiring to do good things want that clarity. What we've been arguing for is to build on the existing regulations, but bring greater clarity to them, because we don't want huge pushback from the sector saying, you're throwing the baby out here. This really is about making things safer for people, and that residents get a better deal and providers get better clarity, which is what they want.
I mean, we're not, as you know, we've spent time talking to you about maybe that we have to help with that client group and help on the single side, and try to do our bit in terms of getting on board with that sentiment and doing it the right way and building the right service. And I would say, we've got a reasonable amount of experience and we can navigate our way through it, reasonably well in terms of our political connections, our commercial understanding. Even so, it's a minefield. There's a relatively low barrier to entry if you're a private landlord in terms of the partnership and finding a provider that will maybe work with you. So there's not really a big barrier to entry, and then there's a complicated mechanism that then wraps it around. That if you talk about how could we provide more of the right kind of accommodation, it's got to be managed, it's got to be controlled, it's got to be looked after a little bit better than making it low barrier to entry and then really complicated once you're in.
Absolutely. And I think the problem that we've seen in certain towns and cities is that it's become the only option for people. So people that end up, with an emergency housing issue, there is no social housing, there's no affordable option. So they end up in a form of exempt. Well, actually, their only issue might be that they're homeless in that moment. They might not have loads of support needs. They might not, need that additional support. And what it does, you end up paying for it more than once then, because they can't get work, so they're not contributing back into the system because the rents are too high. These are perennial problems that we were talking about when I started my career, in fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's the only ticket in town in some towns or authorities. So, and in truth, local authorities are probably being slow to tackle it, because if it comes from registered providers and they're delivering it, there's a level of trust there that there probably isn't with other providers or private sector. But secondly, they recharge all of that to the DWP, so it's 100% subsidised. So there just hasn't been the incentives, I guess, to tackle it until it's grown so out of control. And there are Wild West elements to some of this stuff. Again, I'm really careful what I say there, because loads of it is brilliant and absolutely serves a purpose. They're working with people that other people won't touch for whatever reason. So it absolutely has a place, but it's just making sure that those, we're giving local authorities, we're giving regional authorities a way to deal with it, and making sure it's meeting the strategy for the local area, and not just the only ticket because it's the only thing that's available, because you don't have to pay for it as a local authority.
I always like the sentiment of, oh, it's free then. Like it's free. It's not free. It's not free. None of this stuff is free.
Don't say that to the Treasury, Dean. My God, which is one of the reasons that we've got the government way more interested in it than they were previously, because the housing benefit bill, and not just to be fair to do with exempt accommodation, but the exempt accommodation bill has rocketed. It's 200 million quid in Birmingham. 200 million. That's it was probably 10 million 10 years ago. So that gives you an indication as to the level of growth, and it's that we're not getting value for money on that level of central investment. That's not to say we want to lose that investment, but it could just be better utilised across the piece, really.
Some other projects, Dom, if we could touch on, obviously, in Stratford is pretty cool. People, if they don't know Spring and they won't know what that looks like, but we've had a little look at it in terms of the centre that's being built there. It'd be really nice to maybe just describe the success of that project. I know you're pretty proud of it, and what the hopes and ambitions are for that. Yeah,
well, it's being built at the moment, so hopefully we'll end up proud of it. It's certainly I want to be proud of it, the amount of money we're spending, indeed, but it's a really interesting project, and why it's interesting for us is that it's a genuine partnership, and we've spoken about this before. It's really interesting that in our sector there aren't more partnerships in the sense of genuine partnerships. I don't mean just delivering contracts together and those type of things. And we've had some really great conversations with Stratford District for a while, but what they were kind of missing was kind of a centrepiece for their people that were experiencing homelessness in all of its forms. So we've worked with St Peter's Housing Association, the Food Bank, the Oasis Church Group, who are going to be delivering a cafe, CGL, who are going to be doing drug and alcohol support, Springfield Mind, who are going to be doing mental health. We're going to have the DWP there doing sessions, Orbit Housing, who do their wraparound services, but hopefully some move on we'll get out of that as well from the centre. are all going to be under one roof. And so it's been a long process to get here, because we've co-designed this with people that have been homeless or in supported housing. But interestingly, it's not a supported housing site, it's affordable housing. So we've got 15 apartments there, but we want it to be a centre that you may be street homeless, you may be experiencing homelessness, but long term, you've got to have the ability to train, you've got to have the ability to be in education, you've got to have the ability to work and still be able to live there. So it's been a fantastic partnership, and not one led by us. We've got a great guy who chairs and really does a great job bringing the partners together in Paul Spooner, but we've obviously been leading on the building and development, and we'll be delivering a number of the services there. As an old colleague of mine, when we first ever talked about this concept, called it a social supermarket, and it's probably bad terminology, but I can't think of anything better to describe it. That in theory, people could come to somewhere and in theory get most of the services that they would need if they were either in poverty or have a homelessness situation, and that's what we're trying to create, but making absolutely sure it doesn't feel like you're walking into a council building. And it was the great pleasure of actually the design process was to be able to show people that we'd listened. So the things and some of the design concepts around some of the spaces, the open space, some of the soundproofing, some of the lockers that we put in toilets that people can put the bags in, and it's not going to get nicks, the showers, the free washing machines in the downstairs bit, those type of things. We were able to show those designs that, you know what you told us last time, this is what we've done about it. And that's just been great for buy-in as well. So we're really hopeful it's a successful project, and hopefully it's somewhere we can replicate, because I guess one of the negative things is the amount of commercial spaces that are now free in quite central areas. But actually out of this, if we can do something around, creating employment and housing solutions out of this, then hopefully we can replicate it in other areas.
That was going to be one of the points I was going to mention, Dom, because obviously there's been a real change. There was a change anyway in terms of town centres and city centres, but then COVID's hit that even harder. And obviously there's been a big focus on town centre regeneration in terms of housing. Is that an area where you think social housing can sort of, set roots again and start to establish itself back in the town centre, where potentially people who might have more social issues have I suppose access to better facilities?
I do. I think there is a real opportunity to do with this, because we've generally pushed people in certain situations out of town centres and city centres, haven't we? Because we don't want to see it when we go shopping or into town. But I think it's absolutely essential to have services that are walkable, particularly for the guys that we work with. So I'm hoping there's much more of a mixed model, while not having everything that you possibly want in the inner ring road of Coventry. I know you've just been on the phone with Jim in Coventry before. It's making sure that there is a spread of services and everybody's sharing that load, but actually centrally there are services for people. And we're not developing sinker sites to put all the council housing out of the way of everywhere else. That I'm hoping we're beyond that now in terms of where we've been in the past, particularly those 80s and 90s models. And there's been some great examples of regeneration which encompasses some of this, I think. So we're hoping this is a model that can replicate. I mean, it's not unique, that there are other areas, but hopefully with the amount of services and the accommodation there, I haven't heard too much on the, and where we are so central.
Oh, yes.
We're on the back of Gill Street, which is where Shakespeare's birthplace is. So, we can't get much more central than that. And one of the great privileges, and you've got some interesting buildings at the moment, is that you would never design apartments in the way that we've designed apartments, because the building is so quirky. We've got like a turret that's got brackets. It's going to cost us a fortune in blinds.
You can put those up. You've had plenty of experience.
I would die putting those up. I can't tell you how tall they are. And we've got just really interesting windows that are almost where your feet are. So, we've got to make sure the blinds are closed. You wouldn't want to get naked out of bed, put it like that way, because it's quite a busy street down there in Gill Street. But you would never design buildings that way now if you're doing a resi scheme. So some of the features are just so unique and so exciting, actually, to be involved in that. That's been a real pleasure. And our architects have been super imaginative with it, in fairness, and really incorporated what's been difficult, because you've got we've got like something like 12, 13 different stakeholders with a literal stake in this scheme, and it's been hard work actually. But I think what we've done through this quite painstaking process has got everybody really excited about it, which is great. We managed to get people round the other Saturday, and I don't know what you're like, but some of our staff are definitely like this. That they can't imagine what it's going to be like until they see the space.
Yeah.
And now we took all the order, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my God, this is what we've been talking about." Is that where that's going to go? That's and you can see them just come alive, like looking at the space, which was great. Now it feels like we're on the home straight after a really difficult period. Like, do we keep the project going when all the COVID thing first happened? And it's a big chunk of our money that's going into this scheme. So it's a big ask of our trustees to commit to this, particularly in the timing and everything. But I'm really glad they did, because I think it can have a really, really big impact in the town.
It's not quite the same scale, Dom, but the project we're involved in, where we're purchasing a former it's a Victorian infants and junior school. Part's going to be converted into social housing. Part we're going to have as our offices in a community centre, and we're actually taking the team round on Thursday. And I think it's going to be one of those moments we've spoke about it for so long. But now they're going to see it, and that just really brings it to life for people. And we love that concept, just what you're talking about taking stuff that wouldn't usually be, you wouldn't look at and go, oh, okay, that's something that's used for a social purpose, and actually making it back into that, because there's so many of these empty buildings that are fantastic and are magnificent, and just within themselves have a different, they just say something very different. Like, for me, what I love about the project in terms of Fred Winters is it is right in the heart of Stratford, which is one of the most affluent places in the UK, and is the tourist hotspot, and has so much rich culture and heritage. And then this is where we're dealing with some of people's challenges. I just love what that says from a concept point of view, from a message point of view.
Yeah. Stratford's so interesting at the minute, because it's generally been really well insulated from any type of recession or difficulty. So the financial crash didn't really touch Stratford in that. I'm sure it affected lots of people and specific businesses, but generally it didn't. But if you see the amount of additional universal credit applications, or the people turning into temporary accommodation that have never needed to access before, because the town centre's been closed. So the people that are on the lowest incomes have been the worst affected. So you're seeing Stratford have some of the biggest, I guess, social challenges. I think it's known in its modern history for sure. So you never want the timing to be good for what I've just described, but the timing's a good one for the Fred Winters Centre to be coming in, and hopefully, a first responder to some of these issues. Particularly when you think about things like the food bank, the mental health, the drug and alcohol support, that's all under one roof there.
What's the hope then, Dom? What's the ambition now for Spring? Because you're an ambitious guy and you've achieved a lot in 7 years. And I know we've had conversations around, and you mentioned it earlier, sort of social rent, move on, that being, to me, that's I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like we're still very much, in terms of what we offer, we're on the sharp end. We're still really in that prevention space, and we don't want to be there, but it's what we need to do at this stage to provide the foundation to grow into what we want, and that is as much affordable, long-term, really well-designed, low-cost housing. Is that a shared ambition from you guys as an organisation?
Exactly that. It's so similar from what we're talking about, and I know we've talked about this offline, haven't we? That if 30% of our accommodation is affordable now, we want to increase that year. We have increased that year on year, but we want to continue that trajectory. So we're doing less crisis, more prevention. That's always what our business plan has been about, but things have happened that we've had to focus on the crisis bit. Look at everyone in last year. Massive part of our year last year was everybody in various authorities that we worked, and that's a crisis response. We want to start building our own, developing our own, owning our own, and getting those social rent properties going. That's the absolute dream, because I think there's a 50-60 year history, not just in this country but in others, that creates the most social mobility that we can in our society. So why wouldn't we be doing that? And it'd be remiss of us not to be doing that. We could be a really successful support charity if we want to, and do a P3 and concentrate on contracts and help street homeless people. but I think I think we want to be broader if we can than that they're already doing that market and doing that brilliantly, those type of organisations. We want to have a longer term impact. So that longer term impact means, the most affordable accommodation we can provide, which is going to be the most benefit to the people we work with.
In terms of that partnership approach that you mentioned, Dom, and what's obviously worked so well at Fred Winters is, lots of people coming together. And I remember it was probably going back 18 months now. I met with Paul at the Belfry. It must have been a while ago because the world was open. And we just had he'd basically seen what we were doing and I'd seen what he was doing. I reached out and just said, can we have a chat? Because it just sounds really interesting. And from what I understand with Paul, he's just basically dedicated a lot of his time and expertise into just making this happen. So
all free.
Yeah, I know, which is amazing.
Absolute credit to him. Absolutely. Yeah. He was a new resident into Stratford, so he'd been living down south, and he was kind of the regional lead at the HCA for some time. He's had a really interesting career anyway, Paul. But he was a new resident in Stratford and saw that there was something missing from the town with all his experiences and knowledge, and we were lucky to get invited in, I guess, from that initial conversation through actually the chief exec of BBT had used our name because we were doing a couple of projects with them. So that was the chief exec at the time, not the current one. And that's how our relationship started, because they knew about our history of finding a commercial space and doing something social with it. We've done things like the Adam and Eve pub, where we've got a cafe and accommodation up there, our own building where we've got a community centre, our offices and accommodation upstairs for vulnerable people. So they'd seen that we'd got a history, and we were able to show them around, and this is what we did, and that's how that relationship started. And of course, we were just lucky on the building. You've got to find the right building that gets everybody going. Yeah. We've been really lucky in those 2 or 3 buildings that I've mentioned. It was just the right timing, the right space. Everything kind of fell into our lap at the right time. Although all 3 of those things were big risks to us at the time, because they were the biggest projects we were engaged in and required a lot of capital at the time. The Adam and Eve was super exciting because we worked with New Leaf Living, and they're really good guys, property guys, and we'd worked with them, some of them individually before then, but we went with them to the auction at Aston Villa to buy the pub. And it was just so exciting, putting your hand up and all that type of stuff. It was, and then when we got it, it's like winning the World Cup. You want to slide on your knees, but you have to keep it cool, don't you?
Oh yeah, you can't.
And then we're like, oh God, I was going to swear then. I was going to, oh my God, we've got to make it happen now. We've got to bloody bought the thing. But yeah, those type of things felt huge for us at the time. Hestia House, where I'm sitting now, was massive. Fred Winters Centre feels massive to anything we've done before in terms of level of investment and those type of things. So it'll be interesting to see what's beyond the Fred Winter.
How do you do that though, Dom? How do you find the partners to work with? Because like what you said, it's not necessarily, and this is one of the shocks, I suppose, to me and Dean, is what we expected coming into the social space and the I suppose the charitable and third sector, was we expected a real openness. And coming from the corporate world, we were used to competition and people being quite veiled about their true focus and need and what they want to get out of things, and we sort of expected everybody to be very nice and sharey and let's all work together. And I'm not saying that there aren't organisations that do that, but largely speaking, it's quite a competitive market, isn't it? And how do you repeat and replicate those successes you've had in terms of partnership?
We mentioned this briefly before, but partnerships is one of the hardest things, because we're all different organisations and we've all got our own focus. One of our colleagues calls it's ever so funny. So we go to certain meetings and partnership boards and those type of things, and she calls it ego treacle, because you've got all the people like me in there, I guess, that have all got our own positions, are all defending our own organisations and promoting our organisations in that space. And it is highly competitive, because most of the contracts that are out there, Birmingham's one of the most competitive, where most of our core business is. There's 6, 7, 8, 9 organisations that work with homeless people and have got contracts. And there's only a few contracts about, so it's that type of competition. But I think we've always tried to look beyond that and keep focus on the people that we're working with. That sounds so lofty. But, I think there's been a genuine understanding within our organisation that partnerships do have massive benefits for the people that we work. And every time we've worked in partnership, we've had better outcomes as a result. And, we learned that really early on through the resettlement programme, through working with the Red Cross, Refugee Action, the Refugee and Migrant Centre. They're much better at doing that stuff. We'll do the housing piece, and I think that's what we've tried to do. And as long as you're clear and about what you're there for, what you want out of that particular discussion, that's really helpful. But you also know at some point, potentially through contracting and things, you could be in competition with them. But I think it's been understanding of what your organisation does and what you can bring to the table, and as long as you've got a clear idea of that, people understand that and get to know you, don't they? And you have to build trust over a long period of time. Yeah,
and I can totally understand that mix, what you've said in terms of contracts, and I suppose you're in a position where you can choose the contracts that work for you because you've got that stable base of the sort of 75% of income elsewhere.
Yeah, I think we've always had, our trustees have always said to us, a couple of key questions that we've got to ask when we're looking at anything. Is this aligned with our core mission? Who else is doing it? Can we do it at least the equal, if not better? And if so, why? What's going wrong with it? So we've always tried to come at it from that space. So I don't think we've ever fallen out with someone because of, what we've been doing. Because, if we were working in Birmingham, we want to work in young people, Gene and what St Basil's do, they're the pinnacle of what happens in Birmingham with young people. Why would we want to run a young people's hub, for example? It's that type of thing. They've got a 20-year history of delivering on that. It's those type of things. But it's understanding that actually there's loads of gaps in services, which is where you guys have come in around temporary accommodation. There's loads of gaps around complex needs and stuff. And we've kind of gone into those areas mainly by accident, sometimes by design, because of talking to local authorities where their needs are. And it's kind of arisen from that, and there's been specific challenges in those areas.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's sort of the approach we've taken as well, is listening to where the need is and then responding to that. And I suppose that's not everybody's approach, is it? Some people take the approach of this is the only area we'll focus on, and we won't. I suppose our core mantra has always been, we now term it as homes that help people. So there has to be a real focus on, if we're providing any housing, it's got to be for a positive social purpose, and that becomes the true north for us in terms of when we assess something. We say, does it meet that yardstick of helping, providing support? And then there's those same questions in terms of, can we do it and can we do it well? That's why we've, I suppose, taken so long over the exempt piece, because we've been talking about it. We've had several conversations about it. We've been thinking about it for so long, because it really is an area that, you just don't want to jump into, because the impact, if you do, can be bad on people. So yeah, that's really interesting to hear. One of the questions that is probably an interesting question, and because you're really involved in both sides of this, you're a housing charity, but a lot of what you do is in terms of the support that you provide for people. So if we took that mix and say, how important is housing versus the support in terms of the prevention and resolution of homelessness? What's that mix look like? Because we came naively, I suppose, from a point of view of, well, obviously the problem with the homelessness is you haven't got a home. So if we provide homes, then we've solved the problem. But that isn't the case, is it? And I suppose it'd be interesting to get a more expert opinion on that.
I think they're equal, those 2 points. I think that point that I was making earlier around your two assets is, one is your staff, one is the homes. You can't do one without the other. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty virtuous circle from that point of view. And my advice always is to go as slowly as you can. I know that sounds ridiculous when people say, oh, you've grown a lot in that period of time. But actually, we invested a lot, in getting the right staffing infrastructure. And what was big risks at the time, because we didn't necessarily have tons of spare cash, but we wanted to make sure that we had the staff. So when we got the accommodation, we could deliver. And they're really big internal conversations around how you manage risk, because it usually works the other way around, in that, you want to make sure that you've got the income coming in or the contracts coming in before you start investing in, your back office infrastructure, your systems. But we kind of took what felt like huge risks at the time around upfront investment around some of our staffing and our infrastructure to enable the growth. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to do some of the things that we've been doing, because we put those building blocks in pretty early. And I remember having lots of internal debates around risk. It's really interesting because some of the best debates we've had at board level and trustee level is risk appetite is completely different from our trustees to others. Very interesting, those from a social housing background to a charitable background to private sector background, all very different challenges. So when we have our risk appetite discussions, which are twice a year, we always have to find that balance, because there's very, very distinct views, and in our senior team, in actual fact, about how we feel about certain things and our appetites for certain things. So, but we've always maintained that put the infrastructure in for the staffing first before you do some of the other stuff, because working the other way around, you fall behind very, very quickly. And I've worked on certain contracts before in the past when, you wait to the contracts and then you're trying to recruit and then and it just you get off to the worst possible start, and that's something that you never want to achieve. So we've really tried to think hard about that. And, the big thing for us at the moment, looking at some of the changes that are happening in legislation and some of the things around the consumer standard and the new social housing white paper, is stuff around building safety. So that's been a really big thing. So again, we've gone out and recruited in that specific area, knowing that that's going down the line. So we're in good order. So it feels like we haven't moved at all to when the stuff actually comes enforceable, hopefully we're already there. It's that type of thing. It's a lot of money that we're spending on it this year, but we're hoping that actually that pays itself off in years 2, 3, 4, 5, when we've got all the systems in place and the management of our properties that take account to some changes into that are coming around legislation and some of the requirements that are undoubtedly going to be placed on us.
Yeah, this is where I think the private sector has been, I suppose, under a lot of pressure, more challenging. Private landlords have been under that in particular, because you're right, that benchmark has been going up. And if you're standing still and 5 years ago even, you were doing a good job, like you understood what was happening and you did a good job on it, everything's changed so much in terms of, the personal implications and the financial implications, through to the legislation requirements, the additional, and for all the right reasons. Me and Dean always say, when additional regulations come in, we say fantastic, because it needs it, because it's people and it's safety and it's lives at the end of the day. And if it's not there, then and naturally that means that organisations and well-structured organisations are best placed to be able to deliver that, because they've got the infrastructure to make all these things happen. Me and Dean were landlords before we started Cornerstone, and it was hard. It's hard work. It's like just to know what you need to do. You need to be a mini expert. Even if you've got one property, you've got the same level of responsibility, and so it's hard work. And that's where and I know you work with a number of partners, and we do as well. And part of that is about for landlords, it's about taking away that pain, taking away that difficulty, but at the same time making sure that the residents we're working with, and I know it is for you absolutely, is that they're then getting that consistent standard, that and not just what the minimum standard is, but far above. So we're always trying to go ahead of the standard, so we can keep ahead of the curve and keep on chipping away, because you're right, is that water level is rising in terms of regulation and requirement, and we want to make sure we've got plenty of breathing space in terms of the provision. So it is a continuous journey in terms of improvement, that's for sure.
It's really interesting actually, because with our building safety managers just pulling together a kind of a training program for the staff, and really trying to improve our culture around health and safety, and talking around that, and talking around near misses and those type of things. But some of the things I was learning through the training program, I think one of them, I can't remember all the examples now, but there's like 5 pictures. It's like, which one is the worst here? I think there's a hole in the ceiling with some exposed wiring. There's an issue somewhere else, and I think there's a bike over a door. And it's like, what's the worst in terms of people's safety in that picture. And it's actually the bike across the door. You know, if there's a fire and people can't get out of that door, you know, and actually you think, God, but there's an exposed wire there. But actually, when you break it down on certain instances, it's that type of thing. And it's making sure that when our staff are walking through the door, that they realise that's quite a big issue, that bike that's annoying in the corridor, you know, and actually it's not just the stuff that seems blindingly obvious, like that, a hole in the ceiling or a window latch not working on the ground floor. It's that type of thing, and raising that awareness is really, really critical. And also being able to talk to our landlords, because we do lease some properties, particularly around resettlement. You know, you can get the blinds with a string that doesn't strangle children. It's those type of things that, you know, are a form of education that don't cost anything either, or they cost pounds, you know, pounds and pence, rather than huge investment that make our buildings and properties safer, which is you know, so important. You know, we've all learned, I think, through the Grenfell experience that we've got buildings that we might think are safe but aren't. You know, we need to test that again and stress test our own buildings, and you know, that has to be an outcome of, and why the regulator is so interested in this area at the minute.
You hope it. I think in your case, you're a testament to this, but you hope it matters, all of that stuff, because, like, I think in terms of what we provide on the very front end, you would look at us and go, okay, fine, you provide temporary accommodation, you provide move-on housing, you're a landlord. And from looking just at the website and knowing who we are, that could just be me and Gavin with a portfolio. It's not. You know, there's 15, 18 people doing the whole iceberg of what's going on here, and that doesn't get seen. That doesn't get seen. And when you're in that local authority space, or you're in that competitive framework, it's very easy to go, okay, how many houses at what price, and not go, but what about all this extra stuff? And it's all that extra stuff that enables that very acute delivery of, you know, the product, the service, and the price. And I think it's very, very easy to take the explosion of the exempt market. It's very easy to go, okay, we get a house and we rent it. And then you go, but your safeguarding, your policies, your procedures, your health and safety, you know, all of this stuff that comes with it. Like you said, if you're not investing in that, your wheels are going to come off very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of the biggest things we've seen through all the stuff we were talking about earlier around austerity and businesses having less income and certainly less disposable income is actually one of the big things that's been lost in organisations is training. You know, there's been if you look at what average organisations were spending on training a few years ago to where they are now, there's often big differences. Luckily, most housing associations have excellent training programs, in fairness. A lot of support providers too, but generally in our sector there's been cuts, and actually that, you know, the one thing we've got to do is make sure that our staff are equipped to do their jobs, and you know yourself, without that, you know, you're storing up problems in the medium term. So it's absolutely business critical that we're looking at all of those things and how we're responding to people.
Well, and the fact that being a charity and being a socially focused organisation, you stretch your teams. I know we do that. We step into areas because you want to help, and you think maybe we're not the best people to do it, but there's nobody else there. So we'll step into it, and then you spot your training gaps, and you think, right, there needs to be something done there. That goodwill, that nature to help, can be a I mean,
Sarah, who leads our HR, she always says we're you know, if you're new to our organisation, I guess we can be quite like Marmite, because we give a lot of autonomy, but we give a lot of responsibility as well. And if you've worked in certain organisations, that hasn't always been the case, and it can feel very daunting. You know, so I think it's really interesting about how you manage that balance, you know, going forward. So and that talent management has, I guess, changed for us over time as well, because we're a bigger beast now, you know. So before it was like 5 or 6 of us, and then, you know, so it's very, very different to where we are now with 100 staff, and keeping that talent within the business, and I guess hopefully keep allowing us to punch above our weight a little bit as well. So different challenges for us in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah. Oh, well, I feel like we've covered some really meaty topics, Dom, so I'm going to get us on to some more light-hearted ones, and hopefully you've not prepped any answers today. I want them to be genuinely off the cuff. So we ask a number of quirky questions, and I'm going to go through them all because I think they're pretty quick fire. But what's the first thing you'll do when the lockdown is fully over?
Easily the easiest question. I'm going to go up to the northeast and get my gran out of that care home where she's been a prisoner for about a year, Go down to South Shields Beach and grab a Mincella's. It's the most amazing ice cream you've ever had in your life. And the Mincella family, they're obviously Italian. I think Tony Mincella and there's some of the other brothers. They don't sell that recipe outside of the Northeast. I don't know why. Really bad business model, isn't it? But it's just amazing. It is just amazing. And anybody that tastes it says it's absolutely amazing. So that's my dream, to be able to do that and push me grand down the promenade, really, at South Shields and down the beach. So yeah, that's the easiest question of the lot today.
Fantastic! You've made me want an ice cream now. But yeah.
It's not us warm today, Gav.
Yeah. No, it's not. Too right. I struggle with ice cream these days because I'm vegan. So vegan ice cream's questionable.
So he just licks a big ice cube.
Very, very tasty. So travel back in time or forward in time?
Back in time. Imagine all the people that you've lost in your life and you'd have 5 more minutes with them. You can't put a value on that. And then your future's still undecided, and that's the exciting bit of your future, isn't it? So I don't want to see what I'm doing or whether I'm still here in a couple of years. That's the exciting bit that we don't know, isn't it? And so yeah, for sure going backwards. I know that's not always a popular thing, but yeah, definitely.
No, that's best answer we've had, Dom. Best answer we've had. Yeah, can't argue with that. Win a World Cup or win an Olympic gold medal?
That is such a hard question. I'd probably say win the World Cup because you become immortal, don't you? You look at our guys from '66 and even people all those amazing athletes that have won gold medals, unless you're massively interested in specific sports, you can't remember a lot of them, can you? Despite all the iconic moments that they produce in that time. So from a completely egotistical point of view,
I think they call that ego treacle down there, Dom.
Yeah.
That was an ego treacle pudding. Yeah. What's your Netflix go-to? So film, documentary, TV, drama.
Maybe the last one you watched. What's the
that'd be a good one.
There's 2 or 3 that I've been watching simultaneously. Basically, since lockdown, I've completed Netflix. So I've got it all. There's a few that I thought were spellbindingly good. One of them was The Vow, which is about Nexim, which is kind of a self-improvement group that turns into a sex cult, or there were always that. Yeah, that sounds really bad, doesn't it? But it's so interesting. And it's a guy called Keith Raniere, and there's some quite famous people that get hooked up in this cult that are in Hollywood and stuff. So if you've got time to watch it, watch it. I got really obsessed with it through my wife. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant program. There was the one called The Staircase, which is about Michael Peterson, is it? Yeah. Don't know if you guys have seen that.
No.
Yeah. So interesting. He's a very famous author if you're middle-aged and you like books about the army. So not somebody I knew before this, but his wife dies in mysterious circumstances, and he allows unfettered access to cameras through the trial, which don't always paint him in a good light. So, and you've got that kind of, and it's quite interesting about how you feel about some of the issues that are presented, as to which side of the fence you end up sitting on through that process. And I think the last one, just really quickly, I'll mention is Drive to Survive, which is a Formula One one. So my son has got me into Formula One. I wasn't into Formula One at all until my son got obsessed with it. But it's a Netflix series. It's kind of behind the scenes. So you don't have to be interested in F1. I can absolutely assure you that. So it's about the competition, the rivalry, the funding, but most importantly, the human personality side of success and failure. And it's a brilliant program. I think this is the 3rd or 4th series that's out now, but it's worth watching. Absolutely brilliant. And there's so many lessons to learn through watching there.
It's better than Formula One, I think.
It's a lot better than Formula One. It's a lot better.
It makes it exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just the behind the scenes access and the stuff that you just don't see through watching the coverage on Sky or Channel 4, whatever it's on now, is I just think absolutely brilliant. And, getting much more of an expose between the competition, and you see arguments and those type of things that you haven't really got in football or rugby or those other genres just yet. Spurs had a bit of a go, didn't they, with their one, but it was very internal, wasn't it? Just looking at their stuff rather than.
I like how you get the pit crew, you get the pit teams, and then you get the Formula One racing driver, and suddenly you recognise that the Formula One racing driver isn't anywhere near in control of what's going on. Like they
are the pawns, aren't they? Essentially, it's really interesting. So yeah, they're my three that I've really engaged myself in over the past few months.
That's you must have thought about that, because if somebody asked me about Netflix, I always just end up reverting to the crappiest easy one like that I've watched recently. So
you know what? Some of the best ones, when I can't remember the names of them. So they're but I'm not doing those three. I've been absolutely obsessed with, but there's a couple I don't think have been on Netflix, but on Sky. So I just can't remember the names of them, but they were equally brilliant. I won't even describe what happens in them because it's shocking.
I'm going to offer a recommendation. You spoke so passionately, Dom, about them. I'm going to have to watch those now because I'm definitely going to have a look.
Start with the vow. It's spellbinding. It takes a little while to get into all of these things, and the staircase. Yeah, I got absolutely obsessed with it during lockdown 1, I think.
Okay, a jetpack backpack or a fully self-driving car?
I think I would go with the jetpack just because it's cooler, but I'm terrified of heights. So
it'd be a bit awkward turning up to a meeting, isn't it? To be honest.
Jetpack.
No, you know, this is an actual thing now. So I'm sure it's Wales or somewhere where there's loads of hills, basically. But the paramedics now are trialing these jetpacks. So if you break your leg falling down a hill, they're trying, and you won't. But it is so futuristic. This is in the UK. And they trial these jetpacks, so they kind of get out on the road, they jetpack in. They'll be the first responder until they can get the helicopter there. It's absolutely amazing. You'll definitely be able to Google it. It was in the news like a few months ago. It's like, that's the future. The reason I know that is my friend is in the air ambulance down south, so he was like, "Yeah, have a look at this. This is what I could be doing." So but absolutely incredible when you see it. So they've just started their first few tests. I don't think it's an actual thing yet. But they showed it on the news and on the BBC. So,
I follow this guy on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what his company's called, but basically he's developed this, and it's jetpacks, but they're on your hands. They're like jets on the hands, so you control it. Yeah. So basically, when you're flying, it's like if you need to stop it, but it's literally like Iron Man. It's ridiculous, and he's done loads of test flights and absolutely amazing. So
you know what? I have naturally shaky hands, so I reckon I'd puke if they're on my hands. It'd be a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. So yeah,
there you go. Well, yes, thank you, Jay, for these questions. They're always.
I need to come up with them, honestly. But yeah.
So one important thing before we close off, Dom, before we say thank you for your time, is nominations. So we like to try and sort of speak to people who have a lot to say, who have a real interest in this area and housing and homelessness and support. So who would you recommend for us to approach next to speak to?
There's people that I'm a massive fanboy of, and they don't know that I'm a massive fanboy of. So if I had a completely open book, and they would definitely come. I don't know them, so I can't introduce you. I just watch some of their stuff, and I'm always impressed when I've ever heard them talk. And one is Tony Stacey, who works for South Yorkshire Housing Association. I think it's incredible what he does and how he does it, and he's so smooth, and he's just everything he does is like slightly brilliant. He's just annoying. But absolutely admire the guy, and really interesting what he's done, and a fantastic career, and just does all the right things for the right reasons. So he'd be definitely one that I would recommend. Also, again, somebody that I don't know personally at all, but Framework Housing Association up in Nottingham and Derbyshire, around that area. They really focus on homelessness and younger people, and we admire them at Spring from what they've done over their long history. And I think Andy Redfern's the chief executive there, but they've got some really interesting staff and some really interesting projects. So definitely those. Then obviously the guy, if you never get Gene on from St Basil's or even Ben from St Basil's, they do some amazing work across the piece, along with, and of course Maureen Connolly at Women's Aid would be the other one. Yeah. A titan of the domestic abuse movement, and so passionate still around creating changes and safer environments in domestic abuse, and a long career and a long history in this area.
Perfect. That's really helpful, Dom. We'll blame you.
Sorted the next. Great.
Just to say, as always, Dom, it's been a real pleasure. You've got so much to add and so much insight. and you articulate yourself so well. So I'm sure it'll come out really well in terms of Joe's edit. But thank you very much for your time. It's really appreciated.
Just to give you an idea of editing internally at Springs. So as you can probably see, I've got a massively red face at the moment. Well, before I went away on holiday, I said I had a week away. So I had a week away. And before I went away, I was doing a blog for Inside Housing. You may or may not have seen it. I've reposted it on LinkedIn. And I sent the blog and I sent a photo. So they asked for a photo. So I got the photo and sent it across. Week had gone by. I'm obviously on annual leave. I got back on the Monday, and Inside Housing got back in touch and said, "Oh, you know what? The photo doesn't work. It doesn't pixelate properly. Whatever the technical issue is, can you get another photo?" So I asked my colleague Raj, who is the absolute king of selfies. I mean, if you see his Insta, Facebook, all it is selfies of him looking good at various places. I went, "Can you take a photo and make me less red? Because I've got absolutely burnt to a cinder watching my son play cricket on the Sunday. It wasn't supposed to be that hot, and then it was super hot, as you can still see. It looks like I've been lying on a barbecue still." And he was like, "Yeah, I've got about 100 filters. I'll sort it out, blah, blah, blah." So anyway, took the photo, sent it off. Apparently that was fine. Inside Housing were happy with it. So this was on the Monday. On the Wednesday, my face is all over Twitter, all over LinkedIn, with a massive bright red face underneath. I mean, it looks like I'm alcohol dependent. I shouldn't say that working in homelessness, but it's not a good photo. And that's my photo, and my big break into Inside Housing. So furious with Raj. I mean, and then when I challenged him about it, he goes, "Not even filters can help you," is what he said. Again, our staff always say I've got the face for radio while you're doing this thing we're doing. That was, what I was told this morning. So yeah.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again, Dom. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Great to catch up as always with both of you.
Cheers, Dom.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.